3%. Now, if you scored a 3% on a test, you'd probably hide the paper, right? But in the world of economics, a 3% unemployment rate is actually considered the ultimate holy grail. It's literally the magic number that governments and central banks around the world are constantly chasing. But why not zero? Well, that is the exact mystery we're going to unravel today.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the realization that unemployment isn't just some single, flat metric you hear about on the evening news. It's actually a hugely complex, multi-layered economic condition. We're going to look under the hood of the labor market and really decode the hidden machinery that dictates who gets to work, who doesn't, and most importantly, why.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the full employment myth, then compare equilibrium and disequilibrium, unpack the natural rate, look at labor trends and mobility, and wrap up with the policies used to actually fix unemployment.
Starting right off with Part 1, the full employment myth, and why the goal is never 0%.
Okay, let's dive into this. Full employment is the absolute highest level of employment an economy can possibly achieve, but it typically hits that mark when the unemployment rate falls to around 3%. You might be wondering, why on earth wouldn't full employment mean 0% unemployed? Well, because a dynamic, breathing economy always has people transitioning from one job to another. People relocate, they graduate, they switch careers. Getting to a literal 0% is practically impossible, and honestly, if we ever got there, it would mean the economy is entirely stagnant with zero mobility.
Moving right along to Part 2, equilibrium versus disequilibrium, and the different types of unemployment.
Beneath those headline numbers we always hear about, not all unemployment is created equal. On one side, we have voluntary unemployment. This happens when workers actually choose not to accept jobs at the current wage rate. They could be employed, sure, but they prefer to hold out, maybe searching for a higher-paying gig. On the flip side, we have involuntary unemployment. This is when workers are ready, willing, and completely desperate to work at the current wage, but simply cannot find an open position. So it's essentially the difference between holding out for better pay and being locked out of the market entirely.
Think about what happens when the aggregate demand for labor perfectly matches the aggregate supply. When those two forces meet at a specific real wage rate, the market is in perfect equilibrium. But here's the catch. Even in that perfect state, there are still people in the overall labor force who don't have jobs. We still have frictional and structural unemployment, basically people who lack the right skills or maybe live in the wrong part of the country or just holding out for a better wage.
But what happens when the whole system gets thrown out of whack? That brings us to disequilibrium unemployment. This occurs when the total supply of labor completely exceeds the total demand. Why does this happen? Often, it's because real wages get pushed artificially above that natural equilibrium level we just talked about. Things like significant trade union power, government-mandated minimum wage laws, or even just workers strongly resisting wage cuts can keep pay high. This creates a massive surplus of eager workers, but firms just can't afford to hire them all, leading to a severe lack of open jobs.
Which brings us to Part 3, the natural rate and its supply-side factors.
So the natural rate of unemployment is essentially the baseline rate that exists when the labor market is in equilibrium. Classical economists actually argue that even if a government pumps up demand to reduce unemployment in the short term, eventually costs rise, real wages fall back, and the economy naturally returns to this baseline rate in the long run. It is entirely determined by supply-side factors. It's a pretty fascinating mechanism when you think about how the economy just resets itself. And this natural rate isn't just pulled out of thin air, it is dictated by some very real structural factors. For instance, the quality of a nation's education and training programs directly impacts how employable its people are. But you also have to look at the value of unemployment benefits relative to low pay. If the gap between working a minimum wage job and receiving unemployment benefits is too narrow, it might actually deter people from seeking jobs in the first place. It is a highly delicate balancing act of incentives and skills.
Let's shift gears to Part 4, labor trends and mobility, and our constantly shifting job market.
Just think about the incredible contrast between a 16th century agricultural worker and a 21st century scientist. Changes in technology and consumer demand are constantly creating and destroying jobs. I mean, think about driverless cars. When they become fully mainstream, we might see the demand for taxi drivers and driving instructors completely vanish. But simultaneously, we're going to need way more people in tech, urban planning for new city spaces, and electricity generation. It is a constant, ongoing structural evolution.
And the pain of these structural changes
it is definitely not spread evenly across the board. When you look at the data across Europe, for example, youth unemployment rates absolutely tower over the overall unemployment rates. Why is that? Because firms are often super reluctant to employ young workers due to a lack of experience and the high cost of training them from scratch. Unemployment hits specific demographic groups so much harder than others.
This all highlights a massive hurdle for workers: labor mobility. And there are two main types to consider here. Occupational mobility is your ability to change professions. If you're a coal miner who loses their job, you can't just instantly become a software engineer without some serious retraining in time. Then there is geographical mobility, the ability to actually move locations for work. Even if there are great jobs across the country, you might be totally hindered by a lack of affordable housing in that new city, or strong family ties keeping you exactly where you are.
Finally, Part 5, Policies to Fix Unemployment and the Tools Policymakers Actually Use. When governments step in to cure these distinct economic conditions, they basically have two main toolkits. If they're facing disequilibrium or cyclical unemployment where there simply isn't enough demand in the economy, they reach for expansionary policies. These are your classic fiscal and monetary tools. They might cut direct taxes so consumers have more money in their pockets, or increase government spending on infrastructure to create jobs. Central banks might reduce interest rates to make borrowing cheaper so businesses can expand. But keep in mind, these policies take real time. By the time a tax cut actually results in new hiring, the entire economic landscape might have already shifted.
On the flip side, if a government wants to lower that stubborn natural rate of unemployment we talked about, they have to turn to supply-side policies. Now, these structural changes can be notoriously difficult to implement, but they focus on long-term incentives. It might involve widening the gap between low pay and unemployment benefits to further incentivize active job seeking. It definitely involves heavy investments in education and training to upgrade worker skills, or increasing labor market information so the unemployed actually know where the job vacancies are. Basically, it's all about making the workforce more flexible and capable.
Which leaves us with one final, pretty provocative thought about the modern economy. Will you do more than one type of job in your working life? Well, history says yes, absolutely. Before becoming global stars, the Indian film actor Boman Irani spent time working as a waiter, and American actor Harrison Ford worked as a carpenter. The job market is a dynamic, sometimes wildly volatile machine. Understanding unemployment isn't just about reading charts. It's about asking yourself how adaptable you are to the ever-shifting tides of employment. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the data.